Dynamic range is a topic that's often a point of discussion when photographers meet or chit-chat. While some are bragging about the dynamic range of their full-frame camera, which is better than what they had before, some are pointing out about how a particular brand makes their sensors so well now that the dynamic range is improving gradually. So, what is dynamic range and how does it matter? Hey, this is Jayan Sharma and thank you for watching the Toehold TV. If you haven't yet subscribed to this channel, please consider doing it so that you don't miss such informative videos in the future. Let me ask you something. Do you post-process your pictures? Please comment yes or comment no and let me know what you feel. If you're like me, you post-process every picture you want to present. And one of the biggest reasons why, even if you are a better photographer, you still need to process is because of the infrastructural limitation of the camera sometimes. And dynamic range of cameras are surely not as good as the human vision's dynamic range yet. So we resort to post-processing to improve that. So what is dynamic range? In simple words, it's a range of exposure values in a scene. Let's say you're photographing a giraffe against a lovely sky. Or you're capturing a person standing inside a building but in front of a window and you have a naturally lit background. You may have noticed that the background is much brighter than the subject. So it makes it very difficult to capture the beautiful light in the background and also capture details in the subject. In the case of the giraffe, it makes it an example of a silhouette. But when you see this scene through your naked eyes, you can perhaps see the rosettes of the giraffe better than what the camera is capturing. Which means the camera isn't able to tolerate the drastic difference of exposure values between the bright sunset sky and the dark foreground. So the range of exposure values the camera can handle is lesser than what the human eye is capable to process. So in this example, we can say the dynamic range was high because of which the photographer can either capture the light on the sky well or the details on the giraffe well. Not both. Fortunately, in the example of the giraffe, we used the disadvantage of the lesser dynamic range in the camera to obtain a creative result of the silhouette. But what if there were situations where we wanted the details of the dark subject as well? This is usually the case in landscape photography where the sky is bright and the foreground is dark. So the photographer struggles to keep both of them in acceptable exposure range, and we can say the photographer is trying to improve the dynamic range of this scene. There are a few ways to battle this issue. The first is perhaps trying to solve it in the field itself, and that's why filters like the neutral density grad filter is used. The ND grad filter simply cuts the light on the sky only and doesn't affect the foreground. ND filters come in different powers. For example, a 2-stop ND filter or a 4-stop ND filter which cuts the light in the top of the frame by 2 or 4 stops. By doing so, the dynamic range automatically improves, darkening only the sky and keeping the ground as is. The second method can be to use a camera technique called the HDR or the high dynamic range technique using the camera's auto exposure bracketing. So in theory, the photographer captures a picture measuring the light on the sky in the first image and then captures the second image measuring the light on the ground. In the first shot, the ground is darker and underexposed, while in the second picture, the sky is overexposed, keeping the ground's exposure accurate. Now, a software like Lightroom is used to merge and blend these images to create a perfect dynamic range image, which is what is called HDR. Even without HDR, the dynamic range of an image can be improved in Lightroom by simply working on the shadows, highlights, blacks and whites. For instance, in this gorilla picture, I improved the dynamic range of the shot by pulling down the highlights and whites and adjusting the overall exposure of the image, and then by pushing the shadows up to get details back on the gorilla, which was actually in shade. Ideally, photographers have to develop a skill of identifying what conditions help produce images with better light, and then the problem of high dynamic range in nature can be controlled by using one of the three methods discussed before. Make sense? Wonderful. If you need any help or guidance, you know we are just a shout away. Cheers.